What's up, everybody? Alright, today's video will be about how we dockerize the entire full stack application. Up until this point, we had a backend that we could run locally. So you would go to Spring Boot backend. We had these scripts. You had the local startup scripts, and you could run, build and run, run. And then you had Docker startup scripts where you could do the back end via Docker. So if we do build jar and run Docker, we'll start the back end in Docker. So the back end was set up, but when we go to the front end, all we had in the bin directory was local startup scripts. So we could just run Angular locally. And we talked about this in a previous episode with the back end. This is fine if your setup matches mine. If you have the exact same setup, then you can run it locally, same as I run it locally. But if you don't have the exact same setup, you're not going to be able to run it using that script because something will be out of alignment. And so the way we solve that problem is by creating a Docker container which has a self-contained environment provided to you, which I've configured, I've built, and I've given you the code to run on the container. So all you have to do is have Docker and everything should work the way you want it to. So like we just saw that it runs. So I added a new Docker startup scripts, and then there's run as Docker container. So when this runs, it's going to leverage the Dockerfile that we'll review. It's leveraging docker-compose, which we'll review, and it is building the Angular application, all the node modules, all the dependencies, the Angular CLI, all of that is being installed on the image, which is running as a container on localhost 4200, on localhost 4200. There you go. It's up. So now we have two things running on Docker. And you can see this when we go into Docker PS. You have Angular frontend inner running. You have Spring backend inner running. Great. We can go ahead and stop these for now. Docker stop. So we'll stop those containers. And let's look at some slides real quick to keep me honest. So I changed a number of files. And the reason I changed the files was for ease of use. One of my biggest objectives with the code, the stuff that I'm doing for the 1-2 people who look at this, is I want the code to be there, but I want you to be able to use it easily. And the best way I know how to do that is to provide scripts, which give you context, they give you help, and then they automate running the code via local and via Docker. And so I went into a lot of effort in this particular PR to make sure you could run the full stack through Docker, both locally, which we could do before, but also through Docker, so you don't have to have the exact max setup I have. So we've gone over running Angular locally. We've done this, and I've shown you how you can run Angular dockerized. Now let's look at the actual code. So we have a Docker file. Now similar to the Spring Docker file, we have one for Angular. So we use an image with Node version 20. That's the latest long-term support version. We set up an argument that needs to be piped in. So you'll notice here that I said, do not run this file directly. Use the bin Docker startup scripts instead. We leverage environment variables that must be passed in when calling build. So I pass in, and I'll show you that script in a bit, what this Angular working directory is, and that sets the target directory in our Docker container that we want everything to go. We copy the package.json, we run npm install, which installs all the dependencies in the node modules. Then we install the Angular CLI. We copy all of our source files. We expose the port that we're using, and we run this command, which is ngserve. We added this --host 0.0.0.0, which we needed. It's in another video, but you absolutely need this for Docker to be accessible via your browser. And then we left the SSL stuff as it is. So this builds the image that you will run my code on so that you don't need to worry about it. It's very powerful. And then the next thing that we use Docker Compose because we have so many moving parts. So even though this Docker Compose only shows a single moving part and our Spring backend only shows a single moving part, we're running a full stack application, and you'll see as we go a level up, we have a Docker Compose which runs the front end and the back end, and soon we'll add a database. So there'll be at least 3 services running that Docker needs to orchestrate. So we've added a new app. It builds from relative to this file, so the source. We use that argument again, the Angular work directory. Same as we said before, don't run this file directly. Use the script because we're exporting variables. We've added something called Docker Watch, and I've gone over this in another video, but essentially what this does, by default, when you run a front-end Docker container, so out of the box, you just run your Docker container, you build the image and you run it, it will not refresh your code. So it's building it, it says, you can go to local and it works. But unlike working locally, if you update your code, you do not see that changed here. If you want to see that happen, you actually have to stop the container and you have to completely rerun it. And this sucks. I mean, it takes away a lot of the productivity you get from a scripting language, and it turns it basically into a compiled language that takes many seconds to update, even though you made a very small change. This is less than ideal. Docker's aware of this. So if you refresh, it should say end zone this time. It does. So Docker's aware of this, and that was running the script with the -b. But if you get rid of that and just run it regularly, it's going to use the Docker watch command. So that's what I've put here. And what it's saying is, when this local, anything except node modules changes in source.app, which is over here, run the sync command. So update everything local with Docker without stopping the image. And if you update the package.json, then completely rebuild and reinstall the npm. Otherwise, do nothing. So now that it's running with watch, you can see that the watch configuration is set up, and this is what the watch configuration is. So now when I go back to my app file and I get rid of zone, let's make sure it's there. Okay, it's there. I save, and it updates. So now you're using Docker the same way you would locally. You're able to rapidly develop. That's great. So that's basically the Docker file and the Docker Compose file. We map our local 4200 to Docker's 4200, and then we name the container based on variables that we've set higher up in our environment files. So all that is really good. Yep, so we've gone over the run script, we've gone over it with watch and without watch, and then we have Dockerized the full stack application. So all this is great, but you're still kind of running things separately. So stop this process. When you run watch, it's not going to automatically stop when you exit, like it does if you run it out of the box. So we are at this top level, and there is also a docker-compose.yaml, and there's also a bin directory. So if you go to this bin directory, you'll have a Docker startup scripts, and in there you have run app with Docker. So just to show you, there is no running Docker image at the moment. When I start run app with Docker, it's going to leverage the Docker Compose at this level of the repo, at the top level. And this Docker Compose is simultaneously orchestrating the back-end Spring Boot server, our jar, and our front-end, Angular. So what we run separately in separate terminals, it's now running together in one terminal through one container using the watch configuration by default. So if you go back and you check Docker PS, you have the Angular running and the Spring running all with a single command. And that means when you go to your full stack app and you refresh it, you see the status is up. And once again, if you go to your app.component and you add Zome and save, it will update. No, that's not working. I'll have to fix that. But I will fix that. Don't worry about it. I don't think anybody's going to watch this, but I will fix it in the source code. Didn't work in the demo. Anyway, we are running the full stack application, and we're running it with Docker. So if you look at the top level Docker Compose, we don't have a Docker file, but instead we just have a single Compose file. And so we call out the backend server, and we show that the Docker file can be found here relative to this file. We name the image, we expose the ports, we name the container. With the front end, we name that service. We say this is where you'll find that Docker file relative to this file. It's in the Angular front end directory. You have a working directory, and you have a watch. And yeah, we have set up. So if you compare this Docker Compose, there you go. There's some real-time coding. We actually parameterize this. So it's actually called the Angular working directory. Failed to update that here. This is precisely why we did this. So now, stop this. Should work. But yeah, we've set up the develop. We have the watch, we have the action, we have the sync, we have the path, whatever. We have the rebuild. All this is the same. And then we've exposed the ports. So if you want to run the entire app at once, you can. If you want to go into Spring and just start Spring, you can. If you just want to start the front end, you can. You can use local or you can use Docker. But overall, that's how we've basically accomplished everything. It can obviously take a while to rebuild the application, as you'll see. But in the end, I think the change that I made will fix this, which is good. And again, you can see why I don't hard code things and why I go through the painstaking trouble of creating variables to reuse throughout the app so that everything's tied together in a unified way. So let's refresh the app. There's Zome there, should be, because we completely rebuilt. And Zome, cool. So now we go to the VS Studio Code, open up our app.component. Let's turn it back to end, save it, and update it. Perfect. We fixed it. I'm not going to go through all the files. I changed a bunch of files, but it's just what I showed you. Getting these scripts working, dockerizing things, updating the README. There's not a whole lot here. You're welcome to look at the code base and just go through the README. You can see kind of the environment variables that I set up. I added a bunch of Docker stuff down here that I was reusing with that work directory you saw. So yeah, I'm not going to go through each code. I wanted to demo how it worked. I showed you the Docker files and everything. That's really the most important thing. And if there are any questions, leave them in the comments and I'm happy to answer. Thanks. Bye.